If I could request everyone to please take their seats. Honorable Deputy President, welcome to Cape Town Conversations. We now move to the final plenary session and the final conversation. We will, of course, hear from the Honorable Deputy President in his valedictory address and also have brief closing remarks from the co-hosts. But before that, may I invite the next panel to discuss paths to peace. The speakers on the panel, Tony Abbott, former Prime Minister of Australia, Ana Miguel dos Santos, former Member of European Parliament from Portugal, Anthony van Nieuwkerk, Professor at the Thabo Mbeki African School of Public and International Affairs, Ambassador Latha Reddy, Co-Chairman of the Global Commission on Stability of Cyberspace, and the moderator, Sanusha Naidu, Senior Research Fellow, Institute for Global Dialogue, South Africa.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, let me acknowledge Deputy President Paul Mashatile of the Republic of South Africa, former President Thabo Mbeki, former President Tony Abbott, and perhaps to make it easy for me, all protocol observed. What I would like to say is we've come to the final plenary of what has been a very inspiring, thoughtful, insightful, and perceptive Cape Town Conversation 2. So thank you so much, Samir, for this, as well as the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, for convening a set of discussions that becomes really relevant in a world where we are trying to find ourselves in many ways. And I think the session that we are now in, which perhaps is a culmination of the last 2 days, Paths to Peace, is essentially that. How do we get to the space of peace? How do we discuss peace? And how do we actually institutionalize it and understand it in terms of its many dimensions and dynamics? I've had difficulty trying to figure what my role as moderator is, given what an illustrious panel I have. And also trying to understand from the brief that I was given that I need to think about this discussion in terms of how I knit and thread everything together in a much more cohesive, coherent way that comes back to what I see as the Holy Trinity of these discussions, whether it's the Cape Town Conversation, whether it's South Africa's chairing of the G20 in the next couple of days, and the many discussions that we have as policy think tank, researchers, practitioners, diplomats, ambassadors, prime ministers, etc., as well as civil society and ordinary people about what constitutes peace. And I think one of the things that came very critically into my mind was Action 13 of the Pact for the Future document, which talks about peace being a holy trinity, in my opinion. It's about how do you find stability, how do you find security, but how do you also find the fact that people have to be recognized as equal. Their human rights are not necessarily one prevails over the other. But more importantly, that peace is not just a vertical issue of what constitutes conflict, but rather the impact that has at a horizontal level. And I have a fantastic panel here today to help me unpack, as well as help us understand, hopefully, in the limited time, that we are trying to understand what it is that the perspectives you bring, the impressions you have, and the kind of insights that you would share with everyone in the room today, and of course, the takeaways that we leave Cape Town Conversation 2 with. I want to start with the former Australian Prime Minister, Tony Abbott. And I'm going to do it in a way where I come to Antony last, because being the only so-called African panelist on the session, I'm going to ask you to come in last. But I want to take at least 3 minutes to all of you, for Tony, Ambassador Reddy, as well as Anna, to be able to give me in 3 minutes your impressions of some of the key questions around what is pathways to peace. how do we look at that in our current architecture of where we are, the kind of discussions we're having around the interventions, the challenges in terms of whether in the African context, and most importantly, this is a critical discussion for us, is what does it mean to silence the guns, and how do we define this? So from your respective spaces, can you just give me your impressions in 3 minutes? And then we'll come to Antonio after that.
Well, thank you, Sanusha. It's wonderful to be here, and it's wonderful to be in the presence of the Deputy President and also the honoured former President Thabo Mbeki. I wonder if I could just offer a couple of thoughts about the current international system. It's far from perfect, but I suspect that we will very much regret it if it ever entirely goes, because if you consider the world in 2020, prior to the pandemic, prior to Ukraine, prior to October the 7th, for all its faults and imperfections and inequalities, it was more free, more fair, more rich and more safe for more people than at any time in human history. It was also a more equal world, unequal but more equal than ever before. And whatever we think of the United States, I think there needs to be some gratitude to the United States for having the strength and benevolence to keep what has been described as the Pax Americana going for so long. That world is now under serious threat from what I think is an alliance of convenience of discontented dictatorships in Moscow, in Tehran and in Beijing. I reckon that there will be no peace unless all significant countries respect the sovereignty of other countries and refrain from serious interference in their internal affairs. Wherever it occurs, I think aggression does need to be defeated, and otherwise I think aggression does need to be deterred. And there are obvious hotspots, particularly across the Taiwan Straits, where aggression does need to be deterred. I do want to make one final point though, and I'm grateful to President Mbeki for prompting this final point. The West needs to be careful about demanding that others take sides. I think in the end, democracies in what's often these days called the Global South will choose democracy over dictatorship. But if we try to force a choice upon them, we might find them sitting on the fence, and I don't think that would be a good thing for anyone.
Thank you very much. Ms. Reddy?
Good evening. I wanted to begin by acknowledging, of course, former President Thabo Mbeki. I had the great privilege of working with him in 1994 when I first came to South Africa, and we had many animated discussions in Shell House. I would also like to acknowledge the presence of the Honorable Deputy President of South Africa, and to say that South Africa will always be very special to me because I was here at a very historic time between 1994 and 1997, and I will never ever forget it. I always say it was my most memorable posting. Coming now to the topic of our discussion, which is pathways to peace, we need an international system that reflects the real world of today. We need to begin by reforming international organizations such as the United Nations. As we all know, the United Nations Security Council, where we have 5 permanent members, that's the US, Russia, China, UK, and France, do tend to ride roughshod, the 5 permanent members, over the global system due to their veto powers. I think the UN Security Council urgently needs to be reformed and a more equitable system established. Similarly, I think international financial institutions such as the IMF and World Bank, are dominated by the developed world. Their priorities are not the priorities of Africa or of the global south. We need an innovative global development finance ecosystem to unlock equitable international financing flows. We need to respect the fiscal sovereignty of developing countries. We need better sources of finance, juxtaposed with the debt crisis that affects many countries, and this is compounded by climate change effects. We need in Africa affordable finance at scale, funding that is appropriately structured, easily accessible, predictable, and dispersed promptly. We need an African agenda for financial system reform. We must be positive rather than passive, authoritative rather than tentative. Most of all, Africa needs a united and coordinated approach. How do we deal with the hypocrisy at the heart of the approach of the developed world towards the developing world? The developed world has traditionally argued that developing countries need guidance, experience, etc., to take charge of their own destinies, whether geopolitical, financial, or social. The same arguments, I might add, were used in India at the time of our independence and in South Africa at the time of its independence. So I think I'll stop here for now, if I may, because I don't want to overrun my time, and pass it on to Anna.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. So I tried to say this, Ausit. It's in hello in South African. So it's Ausit. Ausit. Sorry for my accent. So I will give you some key points of my idea. I think all the people here knows the routes to peace. So I will try to give you another approach. So I will start with what I call it the cycle of peace. So how do we go to the cycle of peace? So stop complaining. And I'm saying this to everyone, even to Europeans. Stop complaining. Stop looking for culprits. We need to start to act. We need action. We need movements. And we need to answer to this question, what do you want to your future? After you answer this, you will give me, what is your project for your future, for your country, for your people? Surely is not the same as the Portuguese or even the Indian, because your needs, your culture, your weather, your climate is different. So we need to respect our differences. Then, after defining our own route, we need to act. Defining our own way and start working on that. Instead of complaining, we need to interact. We need to dialogue. We need to search. And when we start dialogue, we enter in the cycle of peace, because dialogue brings search. Search brings compassion. Compassion brings mutual interests. We need to search and find what is important to the other, because we can dialogue, but if we don't have empathy, if we don't have compassion for the other, if we doesn't seek for mutual understanding, we will not get to a good result. Then, this is good for us to develop trust. With trust comes action. With action comes empathy, and with empathy comes dialogue, and so on. So, we need to act more like a catalytic instead of a deterrent. We need to focus more on solve problems, overcome differences, instead of looking for blames. We are always trying to blame others. Oh, now is the other guilt. What I'm going to do? Stop doing that. Focus on future. Dialogue. Talk and listen, but also understanding. We need to speak, we need to listen and understanding and find common and purposes and try to build a common path. Then, to achieve trust, we need honesty, we need empathy, we need cooperation, we need compassion. We need to be, at the end of the day, we need to be humans. We all make mistakes and good things at the same time. So stop blaming, stop complaining the others. And my friends, to break down the cycle of inaction and complaints and stagnation and division, we need to work on this cycle of leading by the example. We need, and to finish, take responsibility for our future and stop. This is very interesting, and I will stop here. We are always complaining. I defending liberty, but I'm always, instead of choosing my path, I'm always criticizing my neighbor. Stop doing that. Doing your work. As my mother used to say to me when I was a child, focus on your behavior, focus on being better, a better person every day. Not focus on the other. Is their path. Focus, and if you focus on the other, come, bring him to your journey, to your, and build a future together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Antonia, I'm not going to ask you to reflect. I'm going to actually ask you to pick up what you think are key points from the 3 interventions we've had from our panelists, our fellow panelists, and bring it to the African context, based on where you are, how you're engaging on this, in the context of peace and security, but also in the context of perhaps the kind of cycles of peace that we need. And are we there yet?
Yeah, we're on our way. And I enjoyed your input, Anna. Thank you very much. It's an antidote or the medicine to the CEO of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, who expressed his cynicism earlier about the talk shop that we have for many years. So I think you are opening a door for us to go through. I hope to pick up on that. You know, if we had more time, Sanusha, we will probably debate the nature of the shifting global order and whether America can be that stabilizing force, Tony, that you mentioned, or whether we actually see a rebalancing of power and influence from west to east and to south. Regardless of that debate, which I think all of us have strong views on, what I know is that this global order is volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, it's ambiguous, and it impacts negatively on Africa's prospects to achieve that vision of Agenda 2063, an Africa that is at peace, stable, prosperous, and with a strong voice in the international arena. Now, many people argue that we shouldn't despair and complain too much, because the African Union, for 20 years or more, has been able to construct an architecture around peace and security, democracy and development. It has many acronyms. It is in existence, and maybe those institutions, policies and strategies, and a culture of doing should give us hope that Africa is able to identify, mitigate, prevent, and resolve conflict. But it's not that easy. And allow me to say why that is. In particular, the continent faces at least 3 insecurity complexes. There's the Sahel region with a focus on the Lake Chad basin. There's the Great Lakes region, Central Africa, with a focus on the DRC, Congo. And there's the Greater Horn region, where there are real problems in Somalia and in Sudan. And then in Southern Africa, in the past couple of years, we have a mixed experience with democracy, some wins, some destabilization, but also the emergence in our region of volatility around extremism, violent extremism, and how to combat that, or how to prevent it. I don't think that the institutions and the policies and the strategies that we've designed is taking care of the problems that we have. And I'll give you 3 quick examples. I attended a civil society initiative in Uganda and in Kenya to talk about the Great Lakes region, the DRC that spills over into the neighboring countries. What did I hear there from the colleagues on the floor? There's great value in bottom-up, community-based conflict analysis. The role of the voices of the ordinary people who respond to conflict and who respond to states and how they tackle conflict. In fact, I've also learned about the limits of military-led stabilization missions, or as the defense experts would say, counterterrorism strategies. In fact, the East African community deployed into the DRC and then exited, and SADC deployed, and we are still there with South African troops trying to do the same. I attended an assessment, secondly, of the lessons that we can learn from the SADC mission in Mozambique, in northern Mozambique, Cabo Delgado, where there was an outbreak of violent extremism. And what is it that we can learn from that, lessons learned, from that experience? The mission has exited now. Peace is relative. Instability is still in parts of Mozambique. 3 lessons: the primacy of democracy and development, the need for good governance and competent state performance, and the limits to counterterrorism activities. 3rd one, and it's a positive one. Earlier in the year, the Thabo Mbeki Foundation organized the inaugural session of the African Peace and Security Dialogue, bringing together people like us. What are the 3 or 4 lessons from there? The first one is dialogue is critically important. Dialogue amongst state and non-state actors, amongst friends and enemies or perceived enemies, is critically important. That needs to continue in our African context. The second one is the AU Agenda 2063, that vision that I mentioned, provides us with a moral guide, a compass, a set of values that is worth maintaining and keeping in mind. The third one is that audience in that dialogue were very critical of African leadership. And they asked for a renewal. The call for a renewal of Africa's leadership came from the youth and the women in the room who were challenging the leaders in the room, which tells me that there's a duty and a responsibility for a transfer of knowledge, wisdom, and experience from the current to the next generation. It's really important.
Tony, I'm just watching time.
You're watching time. I have to give you 2 more.
Which means that for the next round, you don't have much time.
I have to make this point, because earlier in this conversation, we were saying, as civil society and research institutes, how do we network and connect with each other? In terms of peace and security, we similarly need a continental outreach activity and network our research institutions, not only in the continent, but with colleagues elsewhere in the world. And then, we also have to rethink the AU and APSA, that institutions that I think is not working very well. And we concluded by saying to ourselves, the key here in doing what we're asking for, peace and security, is partnerships. Partnerships between politicians and civil society leaders, between academia and the youth and women. Partnerships amongst ourselves, but also partnerships with our friends and colleagues and allies elsewhere in the world, whether they're in the BRICS alliance or elsewhere on the globe, because Africa needs to work with its partners to get that elusive dream, which is peace and security.
Thank you. I'm going to actually ask Ms. Reddy to come in on some of the points that Antony has highlighted. In particular, I feel that you mentioned in your opening remarks about the role of the African Union. And one of the points that Antony has picked up on is the efficacy, the effectiveness, and the efficiency of whether the African Union and in particular, I think the African Commission on Peace and Security, are they not fit for purpose, but are they still able to garner the kind of engagements, particularly in addressing some of the issues that Antony raised, but looking at it from the perspective of where India is, and more importantly, understanding what that means in terms of a partnership going forward?
I think the African Union still remains the logical forum, certainly for engagement with Africa, because there's no other forum really that has all the countries of Africa. Can the countries in the African Union overcome national rivalries and narrow concerns and unite to lead Africa is the question. This is essential if we want to really affect change in the world, in all the areas I mentioned, the financial systems, the power structures, such as the United Nations, the international financial systems, as I said, and other international bodies. So I think almost by default, really, it has to be the African Union. I don't see an alternative. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. And I see your hand.
I just want to add a phrase and a thought regarding to this and connecting with my previous statement. If you want to, and I make the analogy with my childhood and all the childhood, instead of criticizing the other and trying to change the others and impose your vision to the others, fulfill yourself with strength. Strengthening the African Union is a good way to achieve your power, to show your power that, and showing that the world order like United Nations or other organizations are not in a good way or in a good path. So if you improve yourself, if you strengthening your organizations, your more regional or local organizations, it's better for you to take a good position in the world. So spending more time fulfilling this instead of spending your time criticizing the other institutions. Normally we used to say, when we don't like something, we don't buy it.
So, do you want to make some intervention on this?
Well, certainly. Look, I think it's all very well talking about partnerships, about compromise, and about global and regional bodies. But in the end, if a country is set on dominion, you either surrender or you resist. There are binary choices in the world, and I just think that if you look at Ukraine, either it will continue to be an independent country or it won't. Either Israel will continue to exist or it won't. Taiwan will continue to be a practically independent country or it won't. And I just think we have to face up to the fact that sometimes we just have to make extremely hard choices. And while we're on the topic, could I just say I think there's a very big role for India in the decades ahead. For the best part of 70 years, the United States has been effectively the leader of the free world. And if we want the free world to continue in the decades to come, I think India will have to step up and become a co-equal with the United States as the leader of the free world. And if I may say so, I think that's a much better role for India than being a junior partner to China in the BRICS.
Yes, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
I think I would gracefully accept the point made by Mr. Abbott, and India will be delighted to work in whatever way it can and to really further the cause of democracy. I think democracy is very, very important. We've joined several bodies that further the cause of democracy, and I think it's important to show that a country can be democratic and successful at the same time. And, so India is up to it, and India will be happy to do the job that it's been assigned. Thank you.
from your lips to God's ears. And Tony, I know you're itching to say something, and I've got 2 minutes to give you because I want to open it up to the audience.
Yeah, I was the first one to say we have to hear the audience as well. And many young people asked me yesterday whether they can have some voice in this conference, and I think we should privilege them. You know, for Africa, we shouldn't get embroiled in this kind of contest between America as the leader of the free world and India shouldn't be a junior partner of China. That doesn't work for me or for us in Africa. We don't see binaries the way that you put it. We look at the world and say, where can we serve the African interest best? So our leadership here goes to America.
So if someone
And-
attacks
and-
South
and-
Africa, will
Sorry,
South
sorry,
Africa
sorry.
resist?
Hello.
on.
Hi,
Our-
hi. I'm still
Our
the
leadership
moderator.
goes to America and see whether we can save AGOA, our trade relationship. At the same time, we co-here in BRICS to see what the trade relationship with China and India can look like. And we try and find a foreign policy that can be balanced in all these continental sort of outreach achievements. The second thing is, I agree with the other statement here, let's not wait for the UN to reform itself. Let's not wait for the P5, who are supposed to open the door for Africa to take up a permanent seat or two. What we hear is without the veto. The leader of the free world offers a position for us minus the veto. I'm saying let's stay away from that debate. Let us reform the AU ourselves so that it can be more effective in anticipating, mitigating, and resolving conflict on the continent. And that is, Sanusha, where the partnerships must come from.
Thank you. Before I come to you, I want to also bring in the audience here, because I think we've touched on some very interesting but very sensitive issues at the same time in terms of how the debate, the discussion, and the narrative is constructed. And if you can start getting to the mics on the side, again, introduce yourself. If you have a question, if it's directed to a particular panelist, please indicate that. If you have a comment, keep it as succinct as possible. We would appreciate it. As we're waiting for that to happen, maybe Samir.
Hi.
Yes,
Thank
go
you.
for it.
No, thank you. I think this is a great conversation to cap off a two-day conversation, Cape Town conversations. Just a question to Tony Abbott and a question to colleagues from the Global South on the panel, if you identify as from the Global South. To Tony Abbott, look, I get the sentiment, defending the free world and partnering for democracy. But you would agree that in the 20th century, the countries you laud have partnered with all sorts of dictatorships for issues that were convenient for them. They were necessarily not choosing their friends on the basis of democracy, but rather on the basis of both convenience and interest. So how do we reconcile your actions with what is being today served as a cautionary note to others? That's one part. But for the Global South, and this is a fair point, that we have accused, like I have just accused the Prime Minister Abbott, we have accused the West of discarding values and morals in their conduct of diplomacy and foreign policy. And are we doing the same by actually choosing mercantilist benefits over a more values-based framework? So I think there's two sides. How do you both reconcile your positions when you sit there?
Thank you, Samir. I recognize the gentleman on this end.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished audience. So I'm Major General Chandana Wickramasinghe from Sri Lanka. And I'm grateful to the countries and the stage as well, those who supported during the time of Sri Lanka needed, at the regional spillover effect. And they say that the United States, the North-South gap, and there's a lacuna to see that there's a problem. The US State Department state that consider Sri Lanka to be the epicenter of the 21st century struggle for regional influence. In that case, I would like to supporting all ambassadors and the sirs. And similar countries, the island nation, if you take the Sri Lanka, the west is the South Africa, when you are going to the next the next level, and the far east, Australia, and the closest neighbor, India. So these three triangulation will be important for regional influence plus stability. And Sri Lanka has been always have some evolution of many issues, but country against stability. Please, sir, the epicenter of influence in the regional, I would like to ask the Honorable Prime Minister, sir, the former Prime Minister, and the Ambassador, Madam, for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can we have the mic here for Mr. Sharma? Yes.
Well, very interesting observations have come. I just have to say one thing. Thanks, Tony Abbott, about India, your praise for our democracy. One thing I want to say, having been in public life for over 5 decades, India respects all its partner countries, big or small. India will never be a junior partner to any country, irrespective of their military power or monetary power. Secondly, I have a question. Are all the countries who have mandated to uphold the UN Charter and the Human Rights Charter, signed in 1948, respecting it in letter and spirit, or making convenient exceptions? I come from a country which has been victim, and we condemn terrorism. But human rights belong to all the citizens of the world. For act of any action, reprehensible as they were on 7th of October, can an entire people, children and women, the targeted killings, be acceptable under the Human Charter? And that is what has made Middle East volatile. To my mind, Palestinian women, children, and people have equal rights too. And the world must respect that.
I'm not sure what that noise is. Should I just wait? Okay, thank you. It's a fire alarm. I recognize one other speaker that's there. Can you go ahead, ma'am?
Yes, hello. Thank you very much. So the International Committee of the Red Cross recorded 20 conflicts 25 years ago and 120 today. And so my question to the panel is, how do you succeed in making peace a global and common political priority across the North-South divide? Thank you.
Thank you. So, you've had a few questions directed at you. One from Samir on reconciliation, another on the epicenter.
Yeah. Well, look, just very briefly, I take Samir's point about hypocrisy. And who of us have not been occasionally guilty of double standards? Which of us haven't occasionally spoken out of both sides of our mouths? I'm not saying that the West is perfect. I'm not even saying that it's always good, but I would argue that compared to the dictatorships, it's better. That's all. That's all I'd say. And I would concede absolutely to the Minister that independent India has an outstanding record as a regional and global citizen. India has never attacked anyone. It has been attacked on a number of occasions, savagely. It's resisted as it should, but its record is exemplary, and that's why I have a lot of faith in India as a force for good, a continuing force for good in the years and decades to come. And look, as for the terrible situation in Gaza, I absolutely accept that it's dreadful, 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 dreadful that there have been so many casualties in Israel's fight back against Hamas. But I think we also have to accept that it is very difficult to wage war when your enemy is hiding behind human shields. I think we have to accept that. And I think we also have to accept that if Hamas released the hostages, those that are still alive, and if Hamas were to accept Israel's right to exist, the war would end now. It would end now. And I think our pressure should be on Hamas to release the hostages and accept Israel's right to exist.
I just want to touch briefly on all the questions. Samir did mention that he wanted the perspective of the global south. And yes, it is true that every country has been, to a certain extent, guilty in terms of pursuing its own national interest, whether it's by pursuing mercantile goals, as he said. But at the same time, I think to completely be devoid of moral obligations would be a mistake. I personally am a great admirer of Nehru and the Nehruvian ideals that he espoused. And I think that today to just completely discard that philosophy would be a mistake. On the question raised by the gentleman from Sri Lanka, I think where regional affairs are concerned, in fact, he and I had a brief discussion. We did, in fact, try to position India as sort of a regional security provider. This was when I was Deputy National Security Advisor. And we set up a network between Sri Lanka, the Maldives, and India, which was later expanded to include Seychelles and Mauritius as well. And, you know, I think we do have an obligation to ensure security in the region. And on Mr. Anand Sharma's points, I completely understand that we respect all countries, irrespective of their system of government. And I do stand with him where the question of India being a victim of terrorism is concerned, and also on the situation in the Middle East. On the final point made by the representative of ICRC, there are 120 conflicts in the world today. That's a horrifying total. How do we ensure peace? I think that's really the question we are here to debate. That's, and the only way we can ensure peace is by dialogue, by opening up channels of communication and talking to each other. Otherwise, I don't see a solution.
Anna.
Sorry. I just want to add a thing. We are talking about humans, so beside the conflicts and the wars that are going on, unfortunately, there are so many people starving. And for a politician, it's very difficult to deal with that. How can we deal also with that? People are dying because of poverty, with hungry, and so on. So we need to change the paradigm. We need to, and answering to you, sir, I'm totally agree with your perspective, but I think that we all fail as politicians. And I put myself in I am not responsible, of course, but I put myself. Because we need to change and stop blaming each other. We need to stop. We need to get to a point. I know this is difficult, even utopic, but we need to work on that. Otherwise, and it's very difficult. Even, for example, for Europe, being from a country and a continent that is, we are now facing war. For us, war used to be something very far away, and now is there. We need to be the adults. We need to growing up and to speak about these issues with no fear of speaking about this. And the question is that if you speak about anything, now you are being accused of, supporting. We need to get to a commitment, a mutual commitment. And for that, we need to have more compassion and listen to the other and try to put our guns down and trying to get commitments.
Antonio.
I'm very proud of the South African team, including politicians, who take the Israeli cause to The Hague, to the International Court of Justice, where Israel must answer to the challenge of genocide or acts of genocide, and all the other countries that are supporting this cause. I'm very proud of them. Politicians can play a very important role. But that points to something else, and it's the big picture for me. It's the fracturing of the system of global governance that we live through today. It's impacting on Africa. You are reminding us on the impact on Europe and elsewhere. The question is, what is the vehicle for us all? The vehicle is the United Nations system, imperfect as it is. The global South relies on and depends on the smooth functioning of the UN system in all of its components to address all of the issues that's on your agenda. And the role that we can play, including our politicians, is to help improve the functioning of the UN system, because it's the last bastion against improper behavior of the superpowers who are chasing realism instead of a common future.
Thank you. I see one gentleman there. With the permission of the organizers, can I ask him to... Thank you. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Sutikon from Thailand. North and South, West and East, I mean, we have to accept a new reality that the Global South is rising. And the rise of Global South is more like equalization of the world. So since on the panel we have half Global North, half Global South, I would like to ask you how the Global North would want the Global South to readjust their position, their whatever political stance and so on, to be able to accept them as equal partner. And on another side, from the Global South, what you want those Global North to adjust themselves in the way that would allow you to be equally represented. So this is the questions between each other.
Thank you very much. Time is up, but I'm going to actually ask you to respond with your concluding remarks from Anthony coming down.
That's a brilliant question. If you should be a panel member. You know, I'm missing something in the discussion. I don't hear the Global South telling us in nice diplomatic language what it is that the partnerships can look like. And I wonder if there's a poverty of ideas. There's an anxiety about the shifting global order towards the East and towards the South. What does the South want from the Global North? We are ready with many propositions and proposals. This entire Cape Town conversation came up with an agenda, which I hope somebody will summarize for us in a minute, of what it is that we can build together in the interest of humanity. I want to say one more thing. When I listen to American politicians and national security advisors, they view BRICS as a threat to itself, to American interests. The thing about BRICS for me, with which many in the Global South associate, is that we are building a community of self-help to produce the kind of outcomes that we want for humanity. And in that way, it opens the door for partnerships and not confrontation.
Thank you, Anthony. Hannah?
So, Anthony, I came from, sorry, and I'm not coming from the Global South. I came from the North globe. So the question is, for me, is very simple. I'm trying to, and I try to summarize my big idea. There are issues that need global answers, and as a humankind, we need to respond. For example, climate changes and energy and so on. But there are other needs that needs regional answers. So that's why we need to put not only the pressure in the United Nations, because it's very difficult for you to get a common sense with 100 and to almost 200 countries, 8 billion people in the world. How can you get one? No, we need to work on diversity and how to figure out If we start with only, oh, common sense, my opinion is better than yours, we will not achieve. So we need to put our efforts in regional answers to some questions that are more common. For example, for me as an European, for a Portuguese, even in European Union, the people of Sweden doesn't understand why we in Portugal after, or even in Spain after lunch, we need to take some time to sleep or to get a nap because of the weather. Yes, these change a lot because we have good sun, good beaches, so this makes differences and we need to adapt to our climate and our region. So this is...
Thank you very much.
I think it's very simple. What do we want from the Global South? We want a seat at the high table. We want to set the agenda. We want our voice to be heard. And finally, we want a new system of equitable governance.
Thank you. Sir?
Sorry. Before
we got time up.
just to yeah, sorry. Just to finish. I didn't finish. I came from the global north, but I'm truly appreciate the global south. So I will appreciate your initiatives. So this is the. Thank you.
Well, I don't think there should be top dogs and underdogs. I think every dog should have his day. I think that's essentially it. And look, when I was Prime Minister, I tried to treat all countries with respect, and as far as we could help in Australia, I tried to ensure that we were helpful. And in terms of the Global South advancing, I don't think there's any great secret to it. As far as is humanly possible, the countries of the Global South need clean elections, honest judges, decent teachers, and a strong civic culture. And with all those things, and a fair go from others, eventually the South will flourish. And the truth is that the Global South's position is vastly better today than it was 20 years ago.
Thank you very much. Let's give them a hand of applause.
Thank you so much to the panel. If I could invite you to the top of the stage for a quick photograph. I'll also request my colleagues to get the stage organized such that we can have the valedictory address.